music and more. Follow, subscribe, stay up to date. Episodes dropping one of these days.
It's the man, watch that. It's the man, watch that. It's the man, watch that podcast.
Welcome to the Matt Watch That podcast, the place for reviews, rants, and randomness. I'm your host, Matt Seroski, filmmaker, film fan. This is a special edition of the podcast where we will be talking about Stranger Things Season 5. If you haven't seen it yet, spoilers ahead. To join in on the conversation, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Matt Seroski. You can subscribe to my YouTube page where I'll post videos and clips from the show. If you have any opinions on what I've discussed, or suggestions as to what I should see next, use the hashtag MattWatchThat on social. Before we start, I had the good fortune to see the Stranger Things play, The First Shadow, on Broadway. I'd never been to the Marquee Theater before, and it's an interesting experience, because it's within a hotel. So to get to the theater, you're walking through the lobby and past people with luggage. I exited through a car park, but the entrance was really incredible. It had a mock-up of the Creel house, which you actually have to walk through to get to the theater. So I thought that was a really neat detail. And the play itself was really strong. It's a complementary piece to the series that really enhances the world and dives deep into the characters of Hawkins. It takes place in 1959, when all of the parents from the series were in high school with Henry Creel. This is definitely his story, his journey. As an audience, we find out so much more about his character and backstory, and I wish more people had the opportunity to see it before Volume 1 was released, because it does answer some important questions. Why is Henry afraid of this cave? They expanded on the mythology of the town and the people. I never knew that Bob Newby had a sister named Patty, who ends up becoming the love interest of Henry. But there were some really impressive special effects that I've never experienced in the theater before. And I'm still trying to figure out how they were achieved. There was one scene where a character, not going to give away who, but they're falling, and it was done in slow motion, but in real time. I was amazed by this. Now, the actors who played Joyce and Hopper had the characters' mannerisms and voices down pat. I really thought I was listening to Winona Ryder and David Harbour. The part of Henry Creel is physically demanding. He's gyrating, screaming, throwing himself on the floor. Victor De Paulo Rocha did a tremendous job. So far, the series has incorporated some of the information that we got from the play, but there is so much more there that I wish people knew about. So if you are in the New York City area, I would recommend seeing the play. It's a must for Stranger Things fans. Now I'm heading off to watch Volume 2. Alright, let's dive into Volume 2 with Chapter 5, Shock Jock. In the eerie, mind-bending world of Camazotz, the kidnapped children begin to wake up, and while most are convinced that Henry saved them from monsters, Holly and Derek see through his deception. Holly and Max conspire to escape Henry's mind and use Derek to distract him. Back in the Upside Down, Hopper and Eleven, now joined by Collie, escape the military base where she reveals that Dr. K was experimenting with her blood in an attempt to give children special powers. Meanwhile, Will attempts to tap into the hive mind through a reanimated Demogorgon using voltage from the radio tower. In Hawkins' lab, Dustin uncovers Brenner's journals and learns the truth about the mysterious sphere. I thought this was a decent episode. It didn't have the firepower that you'd expect from the first episode of a new volume, but it was entertaining nonetheless. I feel like we got a lot of information in this one. Lots of plans being discussed and put into motion. But the episode is held together by the pairings. Lucas and Erica have great sibling energy together. Their interactions feel like a familial relationship. There was a nice moment between Joyce and Will, where she apologizes for underestimating him. Now, if she could apologize to Jonathan for always treating him like a partner instead of a child, that would be nice to see. In the very first episode, she yells at him for not checking up on Will, even though he worked an extra shift to help out monetarily. And in this season, there's a scene where Joyce is like, "It's too dangerous out there. Will is staying by my side. But Jonathan, you go out." I continue to like the evolving relationship between Robin and Will. She thanks him for saving her life, and in return, he thanks her for talking about her self-discovery journey. Will is surprised to learn that the first person she came out to was Steve, and because he was receptive, she had the courage to open up to Vicky and Will. It's obvious this is giving Will guidance at this time, the 1980s, where gay people were depicted as stereotypes and jokes in movies and television, or demons by the rising wave of televangelists. It's comforting to know that he has an advocate. We have drama between Nancy and Jonathan. I feel like since season 4, this relationship has been headed in the wrong direction, and it has nothing to do with Steve. I'll be honest, in the earlier seasons, I liked their friendship, and I think their romantic involvement did evolve naturally, but I never really saw them together in the end. Steve and Dustin finally duke it out. I've been waiting for this moment because it's been building. They clearly love each other and are frustrated or disappointed by the other person's actions. Steve is 100% in the right, and as I mentioned in the last episode, I'm loving Jerk Harrington. But if you watch the fight between them, Steve is only in defense mode. He didn't throw a punch, he didn't do anything to hurt Dustin. I like the callbacks to previous episodes. Steve continues to call Return of the Jedi the movie with the little teddy bears. He first mentions this during his job interview at Family Video. Then, when Lucas is talking about his plans, he called it Faster, Bolder, Better, which is similar to how he described New Coke in Season 3, Sweeter, Bolder, Better. My favorite moment did involve Lucas and his injury. When they ask to see how bad it is, they all react terribly to it, but say through gritted teeth, "It's not that bad." None of them have a poker face. I also thought the idea of tapping into the hive mind through the deceased Demogorgon was interesting, and Will once again saving the day and warning Holly and Max through Vecna was an intense scene. Overall, I liked this episode. It was more character-driven, lots of figuring things out. Now on to Chapter 6, Escape from Camazotz. After the sphere erupts, the building begins to melt, trapping Nancy and Jonathan inside a room with no way out. In a race against time, Erica and Murray bring in Scott Clark to build a telemetry tracker to find Dustin's group. Meanwhile, Dustin drops a bombshell on Steve, revealing that the Upside Down isn't an alternate dimension, but rather a wormhole to a completely different realm. With the clock ticking, Hopper 11 and Kali reunite with the others, as Vecna uses an unconscious Will to find Max in the real world and send a pack of vicious demodogs to take her out at the hospital. Facing the grim prospect of their imminent deaths, Nancy and Jonathan share an honest emotional farewell, putting their relationship to rest on peaceful terms, just as the melting inexplicably stops. In a powerful moment of clarity, Max recalls a pivotal memory tied to Lucas's music, using it to inspire Holly to find her own way out of Camazotz. There were some really memorable scenes in this episode. Joe Keery and Gaten Matarazzo deliver the performance of a season. Steve is trying to find Nancy and Jonathan when the building becomes unstable. Dustin tries to stop him from going any further and finally breaks down the wall and breaks down. He says he can't lose Steve and apologizes, and I loved Steve's reaction to this. It wasn't overly emotional. This totally set me off. I lost it. These two are so good. It's such a simple scene, about 30 seconds total, yet emotionally intense. On the other side of the spectrum, the scene with Vicky and Robin is really funny. It very much has a Three's Company misunderstanding. Vicky thinks Robin is a drug addict and doesn't believe any of the explanations of monsters and wormholes. I'm glad that Jonathan and Nancy finally had a heart-to-heart saying how they felt. And I know the Duffer Brothers clarified it online, but it was pretty clear to me that this was a breakup. Not a Ross and Rachel break. When you throw an engagement ring across the room, you're no longer together. And by the way, the scene with the melting building reminded me of two movies, House of Wax and The Stuff. If you haven't seen either, they're both worth it. The latter is a satire on consumerism and the health craze. It's a cult classic. There were some nice details. While they're in the cave, Max talks about Holly pacing and it reminds her of Mike. Then in the very next scene, Mike is talking to Hopper and pacing back and forth in the exact same fashion. I'm not sure if this was mentioned previously, but Will was responsible for building the tunnels. I really love that idea, and it makes perfect sense because that's how he knew how to draw them for Bob the Brain to figure out where Hopper was in Season 2. There was a bit of a Jurassic Park reference while they were in the hospital. When the demo dogs were in the basement, it totally reminded me of the velociraptors in the kitchen. I don't know if anyone else got that vibe. The only quibble that I have with this episode is that when Max and Holly figure out how to get out of Vecna's mind, I was a little put off that Max was going to leave Holly there. Max was basically saying this is the path that leads to my body and the end of my journey. Then Holly would have to figure out where her body is and where that journey leads. It felt a little out of character from Max. I felt like she would stay there until Holly was protected. But Max does help Holly find her inner strength, which opens a portal back to the real world. And lastly, Chapter 7, The Bridge. Max wakes up in the real world, safe but shaken, while Holly is left trapped in the Upside Down. Dustin and Steve manage to rescue Nancy and Jonathan and bring them up to speed on Dr. Brenner's work. The group witnesses Holly plummeting from the sky, only to be pulled back by Vecna's telekinetic force. Meanwhile, Erica, Murray, and Dr. Clark's experiment to track down Dustin's group works, and everyone reunites. Dustin reveals the truth about the Abyss, a separate parallel dimension, and they figure out what Henry's plan is, to merge it with their world. Steve proposes a dangerous strategy to bring their dimensions closer together, giving Eleven the chance to face Henry head-on, while the others work to destroy the Upside Down. Will comes out as gay, reclaiming his identity and ensuring Henry can no longer exploit his vulnerabilities. Caleb McLaughlin and Sadie Sink deliver such an emotional performance, I almost wasn't ready. Right out of the gate, you can't drop a scene like that. It does make me a little frustrated that we couldn't get more scenes between them. They are such tremendous actors, and when they're in a scene together, it's golden. The group scene at the radio station was a lot of fun. It could be the first time that all of them are there together, and each of them has a moment that's totally in character, except for one joke. Dustin comments on the rotor's size and says, "It's too big, it's not going to fit in." Robin made a double entendre. Steve hears that all the time and he goes in anyway, don't you, Steve? I know it's supposed to be a joke, and normally I'm not much of a prude, but it kind of gave the impression that Steve is a sexual assaulter, right? And it was clear that Steve didn't like the joke either. This is also the third or fourth joke involving the male anatomy this season. It just feels out of place. The characters didn't act this way at the age of 12, which feels like these jokes are aimed at, so I'm not sure why at the age of 16, they're now going through this phase. But Steve gets somewhat redeemed. I like that he's the one that comes up with the plan. He's always been portrayed as being slow, but I don't think the character has ever been challenged, except when Billy was around. Steve was always the golden boy. Most popular, best hair, all the girls love him. He's had an easy life. But when push comes to shove, he will step up when it matters most. And this was one of those moments. I'm also glad that Mike had a moment to shine. Finn Wolfhard is a good actor. I've seen him in It, The Goldfinch, The Turning, After You Finish Saving the World. He brings a lot of layers to the characters, and I'm glad they're finally giving him material in this episode to show his range, and a scene where he's not pining over Elle. But we'll get to that. A couple of observations. Last Max knew, Hopper was dead, right? So she should be a little surprised to see him alive. And there wasn't really a reaction. When Mr. Clark sees Elle, I would have liked him to acknowledge that she's Eleanor, Mike's second cousin from Sweden. That would have been a nice callback. But she does look much different than the last time he saw her, so he might not have made that connection. How does Mike know how to build a bomb? I mean, that gets you on a list if you look it up on the internet these days. So where was that information readily available? Even if he's super smart in science, would Mr. Clark teach his students how to devise a bomb? Now, I know Nancy has always been a good shot as seen in Season 1, but it is a little silly to think that she can outshoot military soldiers. And last, out of all the things we've seen in Stranger Things, nothing is creepier than the Children of the Corn vibes I was getting from this episode. So let's talk about the coming out scene. I saw online that this episode has gotten review bombed mostly because of this one scene. I know it's caused a lot of controversy amongst the pearl clutchers out there. You know, the ones that don't want their children to be indoctrinated, while also fighting to have the 10 Commandments posted in public schools, which is a violation of the separation of church and state. But even some LGBTQAI plus advocates believe that they've been queerbaited by this series. Look, Stranger Things hasn't gone woke. It's always been inclusive and appropriate to the time period. This scene didn't come out of nowhere, folks. In the very first episode, Season 1, when Joyce goes to the police to report that Will is missing, she tells Hopper that Lonnie, Will's father, calls him the F-slur. But the lore goes back even further. When the Duffer Brothers were pitching the series under its original title, Montauk, this is the character description of Will in their presentation. Will Byers, 12, is a sweet, sensitive kid with sexual identity issues. The first sentence. He only recently came into the realization that he does not fit into the 1980s definition of normal. It's always been in there, and if you don't believe me, just look up the Montauk presentation on Google. It is actually an interesting document to read if you're a fan of Stranger Things, or want to pitch out your own television series. Now, I will admit that the coming out scene felt a little cringy, but before all you homophobes fist pump the air, it's from a writing standpoint. It makes sense that as long as Will was carrying around this secret, Vecna was going to use it against him to tap into his mind. Will couldn't risk that because it almost got Max killed. So Will had to reveal the secret so it's no longer a burden. It frees his mind from all of that fear to be able to take on Vecna. But would I come out in front of Murray Bauman? Probably not. And you can't tell me that Erica didn't have something snarky to say. With that being said, I didn't like that Will called Mike his Tammy, because that literally means nothing to anyone in the group but Robin and Steve. So I thought it was awkward for him to mention. He could have just skipped that and said, it was never about my crush, it was about me, my journey. I think after Joyce declares, you'll never lose me, and each of the friends says, or me, or me, or me, was on the borderline of schmaltzy. Like, I was uncomfortable watching it. And I did see an interview with Noah Schnapp where he questioned if that would work. I thought he did a great job in the scene. Will did that nervous babble thing that I'm sure he picked up from Robin. This scene was completely necessary for Will to help out in the battle against Vecna. Now, to all the Bylers, the people who have been clamoring for Mike Wheeler and Will Byers to get together. What show have you been watching? Mike has never been interested in Will. They are best friends, and that's it. You can create fan edits with certain looks the characters give each other all you want. The only storyline that Mike has been given over these 5 seasons has been around Elle. Every season, he was enamored with her in season 1. In season 2, we had emo Mike because Elle wasn't around. Remember in season 3, all the friends were mad at Mike and Elle because all they wanted to do was spend time together away from the group. And season 4, he flew out to California to be with Eleven, even forgetting it was on the day of his best friend Will's birthday. There haven't been any significant side quests in Mike Wheeler's journey. It's always been about Elle. You're just angry that the fan fiction that you made up in your head didn't come to fruition. So, congratulations to Stranger Things for doing the impossible, bringing MAGA homophobes and the LGBTQAI+ community together. But on a serious note, I understand if people are disappointed with how Will's arc turned out. And the real solution to that is to get more showrunners and writers who are part of the LGBTQAI+ community, because they're the ones that can speak from experience. That's why it's important to have diversity, inclusivity in workplaces, in your life, so that you get exposed to people of all backgrounds who share a different lived experience than yourself. That's why representation is so important in the media. It doesn't matter if it's an actor, a late night talk show host, an anchor on the evening news. When people say, I don't want a black mermaid, or I don't want to see two guys kissing, what you mean is, I don't want to see anyone different than myself. And that's why, despite its flaws, it's important to have scenes like this in a popular television show, especially with a character who from the very beginning was going on this journey of self-discovery. Overall, I liked this volume. It might rank a tick below the first volume. These episodes got more heavily involved in the world building and adding all the scientific mumbo-jumbo in there. It does lead to some confusing writing, par for the course in a sci-fi show. I think with these types of series, you have to have a just go with it type of attitude. Not everything is going to make sense, and don't try to analyze it a little too deeply. And I think that's part of the problem with Stranger Things fanatics. Every color, every look, every piece of clothing gets picked apart like it's the Zapruder film. I honestly don't think people know how to enjoy entertainment anymore. It's easier to rage bait for clicks. And I know it's a social media phenomenon. I'm sure if some movies from the 80s were released today, people would have a problem with The Goonies, Back to the Future, Ferris Bueller, Die Hard, The Breakfast Club, Lethal Weapon. I mean, come on, people. I think it might be different if Stranger Things was a series that lasted 5 seasons within 5 years. Because the truth is, 10 years is a lifetime away. Just think about if you started watching this show when you were 15, and now you're 25. That's almost a completely different lifetime, a completely different experience. So I think some people have just grown up and gone, the things I enjoyed about the show when I was 15 aren't there now that I'm 25, so it's not good anymore. But I disagree with that. I think this season is decent so far. I've definitely been enjoying it more than season 4, and I am looking forward to rewatching it. But, you can't please everybody. And that sets us up for the finale, which I will also be watching once it gets released. So be on the lookout for the next Matt Watch That Stranger Things special, the finale. That's all for this edition of Matt Watch That. Thanks for listening to me babble. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Matt Seroski. You can subscribe to my YouTube page where I'll post videos and clips from the show. If you have any opinions on what I've discussed, or suggestions as to what movie or TV pilot I should see, use the hashtag MattWatchThat on social. Head over to mattseroski.com for all the latest news and updates, and come back next time for the reviews, rants, and randomness. Erica and Murray bring in Scott Clark to build a telemetry... I'll figure that one out. Dustin reveals the truth about the Abyss, a separate parallel dimension, and Max reveals Henry's horrific plan. Why do I like alliteration so much?